Nobody disputes our immigration system is overwhelmed and broken. Daily now, we hear our politicians bicker back and forth, offering few solutions about what to do about the humanitarian crisis playing out all along our border.
And caught in the middle of all of this, thousands of children, many of them infants, unable to understand what's happening. Tonight, foreign investigator Stacey Frymeir introduces us to the children of the border.
In the halls of Congress, or in the comfort of your living room, it might be easy to think of migrants as numbers or stats. But behind each face of these migrant children is a unique story, a reason why their parents made the choice to leave their homes and head for the United States. For these children, their short lives have been met with hardship, violence, pain, and suffering in Central American countries plagued with violence and corruption.
Children's sense of physical and psychological safety has been threatened very, very significantly. Especially for very young children.
Stacey Frymeir is a child therapist with Las Cumbres Community Services, a Santa Fe-based group that for decades has helped New Mexico's children overcome trauma. In the last month, Stacey and her team's mission expanded.
We've begun to hear stories about things that have happened to families and children on their migration journey.
The federal government awarded Las Cumbres a grant to help migrant children. This team is going into shelters and churches in New Mexico, El Paso, and on the day we were with them, Juarez, Mexico. The Casa del Migrante shelter houses families before they present themselves at a port of entry to make an asylum claim. Some have been sheltered here for weeks or months. To give you some perspective about how much has changed, most years this shelter would take in about 400 migrants. Last year, this same shelter took in 10,000. The team starts by talking to the unaccompanied minors, children sent to find America without an adult to look after them. This teenager told the team about the violence in his home country and why he needed to get away.
One of the things that we've definitely recognized is that there's a lot of violence, a lot of community violence and a lot of domestic violence. They're literally afraid for their lives.
Sitting a toddler down for an interview is impossible, so the team uses playtime to interact with them. A little bit of play, a little bit of talk to gauge how the child is doing and to assess if that child has experienced any trauma.
Those look nice on you.
Even the separation from a primary caregiver can induce a sense of this person, because they're no longer with me, it has the impact on a very young child as though they're dead. So being traumatically separated, for example, at the border, an infant or a very young child who's separated from their caregiver, that trauma alone can cause significant distress.
After leaving this shelter, most of these kids will scatter across the United States and wait possibly years for a day in court to have their asylum claim heard. Meantime, other therapists will be able to access information obtained by the Las Cumbres team. The behavioral health help happening today could forever shape each of these futures. With a humanitarian crisis as large as this, with 70,000 kids showing up at the border, with churches and shelters and ICE detention centers maxed out, we acknowledge that the help from the New Mexico-based Las Cumbres is a drop in the bucket. Regardless of what's happening in Central America, there is a growing concern the U.S. cannot handle the influx of migrants seeking asylum. Just last week, the nation's top border official said the massive flow of migrants has caused the U.S. immigration enforcement system to come to a breaking point.
Why is all this occurring? The increase in family units is a direct response to the vulnerabilities in our legal framework, where migrants and smugglers know that they will be released.
President Trump has even threatened to shut down the southern border if the migration flow continues.
If they don't stop them, we're closing the border. They'll close it, and we'll keep it closed for a long time. I'm not playing games. Mexico has to stop it. They have people coming right through Mexico.
Each day, more and more Central American families show up at the U.S. border. All become wrapped in a complex, broken system that has these children trapped. Ultimately, judges will decide if these children in the shelter today will be able to live in the United States or have to head back home. Whatever happens to these kids, they'll remember the team from New Mexico who met them with a smile and showed them kindness. And Steve, you may have noticed we saw former cabinet secretary from CYFD, Monique Jacobson, in that video. After the Martinez administration ended, she took on a few different projects. That is just one of those projects.
So we know these kids had a really rough road to get here. So what does the future hold for these kids?
And that's like the heartbreaking part about it, right? So we know statistics show that 90 to 95% of all asylum seekers, their claims are denied. And so for a lot of these kids, the vast majority of these kids in these shelters, more than likely the future holds for them to be repatriated back to their home countries. And so I think the concern is for so many of these kids, all this effort may be for nothing.
Powerful stuff. Thank you, Chris.